Here today with Paco. He's a local zeitgeist. Today we're going to talk about the art in Las Vegas, whether it's downtown in the art district or whether or not it's the architecture that we find on the strip.
My name is Brian Paco Álvarez. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, two immigrants that showed up in Vegas in the 1960s. Love my town. I'm an art curator, entrepreneur, anthropologist, and someone who loves this city more than anybody else.
So you're a tour guide here in Las Vegas, but it's a different type of tour because you're focusing on the local art.
Yeah, so I have two companies. I have my art company, and then I have a tour company. And so I began doing tours of Las Vegas. It's a funny story. It's very quirky because I was working at the Liberace Museum of all places. And I had just landed that job when I was still in college. I was getting my degree in anthropology with an emphasis in museum studies. And I landed a job at the museum, which was located on East Tropicana and Spencer, and right by my house. And Liberace was such a big part of Vegas culture when he was still alive and back in the 70s and early 80s. And getting that job was kind of like me coming full circle. And I took great pride in working at Liberace and his crazy, quirky collection of 8 cars, 17 pianos, 140 costumes, a vast family archive. And one day I had a couple from England come in, and I gave them a small tour of the museum. And they had asked me, they were very curious, and asked me, what's Old Vegas like? What's Fremont Street like? And I told them. And they said, "Oh, that's great. Can we take a tour down there?" And I said, "Yeah, you just drive down there or take a cab and or the bus even, and you can experience it." And so they left the museum. They were very happy with what their experience was in the museum. And about 30 minutes later, they came back and they said, "Could we hire you to give us a tour of Fremont Street?" And I said, "You don't have to hire me. I'll just do it." And so I went down with them the next day and I gave them a tour of Fremont Street. I think I was definitely not one of the first, but it was, there were other people that were just listening to me. And it got to the point where I had a little crowd going, and they said, "Well, you should think about doing a tour company." And it wasn't until more recently that I decided to do that. And then I did a lot of fam tours for the LVCVA. So LVCVA would bring in uh, reporters from around the globe. They would put them up in hotels, wine, dine them, and give them tours. And I was always available for the LVCVA to do tours with the FAMs. And then I worked for the LVCVA for 6 years as the curator of the Las Vegas News Bureau Photo and Film Archive. And during my interregnum there, I also gave a lot of tours to the media. So.
And so kind of fell into that position, but kind of felt like it sounds like it kind of fit where you were like personally, right? Kind of that love for Las Vegas and the culture that's kind of developed here in Las Vegas and sharing that with people that were coming here.
Right. I think for me, there's a frustration, and I was just talking to the Lyft driver who brought me over here. There's so many people that have moved into my hometown from other places. There's been an estimate that the local natives are between 10 to 20%. Back in the 1950s, we were 90%. There was we were a much higher percentage of native borns here, and that had set the stage culturally for the city. People think that Vegas's cultural arts only started 20 years ago, or it started in 1990. No, it did not. It started long before that. I'm a cultural anthropologist. If we really want to talk about culture and the history of the city, it started more than 10,000 years ago. And there is more than ample archaeological evidence of human habitation in southern Nevada for anywhere between 10 to 15,000 years. And we have evidence in caves. We've had archaeological excavations that have seen fire pits, especially out in Tule Springs, which is now a national monument thanks to President Obama at that time. Uh, we we've known that Las Vegas has been a crossroads of the peopling of the Americas for many, many years. If you look at the map where Las Vegas is situated, and if you look at Alaska, the Bering Strait, and South America, we're right in the middle. And the environment in Las Vegas 10,000 years ago was definitely a lot different than it was. It was a lot rainier. It was a lot more humid. We had a lot more flora and fauna in the area. there is a vast paleontological um, treasure trove out at Tule Springs where American mastodon has been discovered, bones, the giant sloth, the saber-toothed tiger, the American horse and camel, that were all hunted into extinction by the peopling of the Americas. So we've had people coming through this area for many millennia. With that said, also we should never forget about the Paiutes that have been here for 2,600 years. And so, this is their land. And they're still here. And so when I hear people say, "Well, there's no art and culture," I said, "Don't you want to say that to my friend Fawn, who's a member of the Paiute tribe?"
Mm-hmm.
I don't think uh, we can't dispel the enormous cultural resources of our Native Americans, and so that has left also an indelible mark in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas is also on the route of the Santa Fe Trail between Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Los Angeles, and there's now the Europeans are starting to come in, and so the first European to arrive in Las Vegas that we know of was uh, allegedly was Rafael Rivera. Came in 1829. He was a Mexican scout sent by the Mexican government, part of the Antonio Armijo expedition to explore the new land of the new country of Mexico because they had just seceded from Spain. And so that's what began, where that kind of sets the stage for what we are today. Granted, in 1905, we were founded as a railroad water stop between Salt Lake City and San Pedro, California, without the concept of that we would become a gaming mecca 50 years later.
Yeah.
So,
Right. And 1905, right? Of course, it was the water.
of course.
Going back, what you're talking about, going back thousands of years ago, kind of that crossroads, but it wasn't, again, not only the fact that it was kind of in the center, but it was a matter of there were resources here, right? I mean, you're talking about long travels across desert, mountains, and then getting to a center where you can get water, right? And that's the biggest thing.
And I think that's also something that, when we look at the Mormons who arrived here in 1855, if you look at Mormon settlements across the American West, especially when the Mormons arrived in Salt Lake City, their goal was to populate a town every 50 miles. Why is that? Because that's as far as a horse and oxen can go in one day. So if you look at Las Vegas, between Overton, Nevada, and here, it's 50 miles. Now, it's also, the Spanish called that stretch of land La Jornada del Muerto, the journey of death, because there was no water between there and here. And, and the Mormon fort, which is still standing, or at least part of it, built on, it's on the original foundations. And they were camped out right next to the creek, right next to Las Vegas, the creek, which was estimated at 11,000 gallons of water per second were coming out of there. And Las Vegas is dotted with springs all over the place. North Las Vegas has done a nice job in preserving one of the springs out at Craig Ranch. So there's a natural spring as if, Native Americans would have seen it back in the day, or even settlers.
So talking about the culture and developing the culture over thousands of years, even the past couple of thousand years, how does the fact that Las Vegas has been a crossroads, for resources, how does that play into the culture that's developed here within Las Vegas?
Well, water. Las Vegas wouldn't be where it's at if it wasn't for water. Native Americans settled here because of water. We became a crossroads because of water. Rafael Rivera was following the Colorado River, and he followed a tributary of water coming in off of into the river, and he followed that tributary. It just happened to be the Las Vegas Wash, and he followed it, and and he discovered that Las Vegas was meadow-like, and so hence he named it Las Vegas, as the story goes, right?
The meadows, right?
The meadows, yeah. The Mormons, the same thing. They settled here because of water. The Santa Fe Trail followed the springs across the Southwest, finding all of the proper water spots, because you need water. I mean, if your horses and your cattle and humans, your families with you, you need to drink water. And they also mapped out the good water, agua dulce, sweet water, or amargosa, which is a salty water, which is around Death Valley. So, water is our biggest resource. And when William Andrews Clark decided to build his spur He was very visionary, William Andrews Clark. He's the founder of our city. He he envisioned that Los Angeles would be the main port city into the Americas from the West Coast, and he envisioned that we that the markets of the East would be our future. Talk about a guy who had a vision well over 100 years ago. That we would be our biggest trading partner, or one of our.
And this is the guy who Clark County is named after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so he envisioned China as being the future, and in 1904, 1903. And so, but he was trying to figure out a way to take market share away from San Francisco, which at that time was the largest port on the West Coast, and he decided to build a spur. So it kind of controversial the way he did it. It was either the Union Pacific Railroad or the Salt Lake, San Pedro, Los Angeles Railroad. So it's kind of both. It's almost like they worked together, but they didn't. And then finally, in 1921, the Union Pacific Railroad took it all over. But he built a spur from the Transcontinental Railroad in Salt Lake City south through some pretty epic terrain, and came through Las Vegas and all the way to the ports of San Pedro in California. And talk about prophetic. In 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake happened, which shut down that port. And so San Francisco never truly recovered as a major port city after that earthquake, at least not the major one on the West Coast. Los Angeles is now that. So talk about a visionary. And of course, he brought the railroad through here was because he needed water, because there was more than enough water for the steam locomotives and for a small population to live here to help take care of the trains. When Las Vegas was founded, there were, I don't know, 20 people here.
Yeah, who could you decide to come down and live here? It had to be like an assignment, right?
And now look at it. It's this metropolis in the middle of the Mojave Desert.
So that's interesting. I want to go back to this idea of like how did the culture develop, and what is the culture within Las Vegas? Because, all right, so we have water, right? There's this need economically, right? Like, you're talking about Mr. Clark recognizing that there's going to be supplies coming from the east. We've got to be able to provide, a path to get all the supplies up into the United States, up to, into the center of the country or wherever it needs to go. So is it a matter of then the people that are being attracted here, right? They're the ones that are then setting the roots for the culture?
Well, remember, most of the people that come to Vegas are from somewhere else. Now we can say, oh, now you're multi-generational Las Vegas. Oh, yeah, because my great-grandparents showed up on a wagon, right? My parents actually arrived in a car. So they drove across country from New York, originally from Argentina. And they bring in their cultural mores from other communities. And so that's very normal for any city, right? In the 1800s, the predominant culture in New York City were Dutch Americans. They were the predominant old families of New York. People, last names like Vanderholden and anything with a van in it, right? Or Roosevelt even. So, and we've had some Dutch presidents as well. Van Buren is another one that comes to mind. So they brought in their culture, and then what ends up happening is they establish very deep roots in that community, and then they become, the social cachet of that community, right? And so throughout Las Vegas's early history, from 1905 through the early part of the 1960s, we have these great events that took place in Vegas. We had, of course, the construction of Hoover Dam, which brought an enormous influx of people during the Great Depression here. We had the establishment in 1935 of El Dorado Days Parade. The first parade was in 1936, but the community came together and said, we need something that helps establish Las Vegas culture. What is that? So El Dorado was it. That was our main thing. And in the 1950s, we had the El Dorado Days Parade was so huge and internationally acclaimed that it actually overshadowed the Rose Parade in LA, which is now one of the biggest parades in the world, if not the biggest. So our floats, our pageantry that we had in the 1950s El Dorado Parade, that if you look at the Rose Parade today in Pasadena, that's what Las Vegas was like in the 1950s. And El Dorado, if you were not dressed in Western wear, they would arrest you and they would put you in a jail, in a jail cell, right there on Fremont Street. And then they would make you go through a kangaroo court because you had to wear something Western. And that's when the town was only 5,000 people. You know, you had 10,000 people. You didn't have a lot of people here. But they would sweat you out if you were not in some cowboy hat, cowboy gear, because they established that Las Vegas was a Western town. So Vegas Vic, the creation of Vegas Vic in 1949, in partnership with the J. Walter Thompson Agency, the Las Vegas or the Desert Sea News Bureau, which eventually became part of the Chamber of Commerce in 1949, and in 1993 it then went on to become part of the LVCVA. So Las Vegas News Bureau is a vast archive. You should reach out to my friend Kelly Lux, who's the curator and archivist of the archive now. I was there before her. And it's a $6 million. It's a 6 million image and film archive of Las Vegas history. It's the most comprehensive archive of Las Vegas photographic history in the world. It's really remarkable. UNLV Special Collections has a lot of the early stuff, but the News Bureau shows this, what Vegas culture was like, what happened over time as the city began growing, especially in the later 1960s, 70s, 80s, is that a lot of the local population, they moved out. They left the city, they aged out. The kids weren't as passionate about, you know, the El Dorado parade. The hotels stopped investing in the El Dorado parade because all the floats, the major floats, especially the pageant float where all the women were on the floats, those were all sponsored by the hotels. And, you know, floats are expensive. And so having the hotels involved helped greatly because it was kind of competition, but it was also marketing for them as well. And we started seeing a waning of that as well. So we would never see a truck filled with kids in the back waving balloons. You know, we would have a float. They would build a float. Still a car, but it was covered in a float. And that just started going away because of the displacement of so many people coming in from the city. We had the second wave of migration into the city that really, really displaced the local culture. And we see that a lot in downtown Las Vegas, where we had a lot of people moving out of downtown Las Vegas from those little nice cottages that were down there and all these cool little buildings that were built in the 20s and 30s. And they started moving into the larger homes in the suburbs, especially along Maryland Parkway when the Paradise Development Group came in under Erwin Molaski. They started developing all of Maryland Parkway. And so a lot of people started moving out of downtown. And what we see is the attorneys starting to move in. So the attorneys purchased a lot of those buildings and have turned them into offices and stuff like that. And we hope, I live downtown. I live on Las Vegas Boulevard and Gas. I tell people, if you pass Gas, you went too far. So,
ouch.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
But there was a time when attorneys would tear down some of the buildings, or there's some empty lots. And so there was a planning commissioner, Steve Evans is his name. He's still around. Old Vegas. His father, Blackie Evans, very famous. And he did something really special on the planning commission. Is he would encourage any new buildings that were being built in these neighborhoods to be built in the spirit of the residential feel of the neighborhood. So you have these larger buildings, but they looked residential. They looked like kind of McMansions, but it still was in character of the neighborhood. Now they're just building boxes.
Yeah.
You know, I won't name any of them, but considering, you know, the audience, but yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you brought up attorneys, and I think that's something interesting because, you know, that's what I see. Like most of the artwork that I see is cruising down the freeway and seeing billboard after billboard after billboard. And to me, right, I'm thinking, okay, what is in my immediate culture here within Las Vegas? And it's lawyers, right? I'm an attorney.
Of course.
And of course, a personal injury attorney, right? Advertising on billboards,
Sure.
on radio, on TV, right? It's all out there. And riding my bike and my church, right? And so I'm trying to think, and probably like the legal has a huge influence in it. And Las Vegas is kind of known for that as well, like personal injury attorneys, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have a vast history with attorneys here. I mean, Vegas, we have our attorneys. Well, listen, if you look at the contract that Helen Stewart signed with William Andrews Clark. That's sitting at UNLV Special Collections when she sold her ranch uh, to um, to the railroad. 1903, I think it was 1903, for a whopping $58,000 or something like that, which he didn't want to pay. His brother, God, what's his name? Something Clark. I forgot his name. Anyway, William Andrews Clark's brother, whose son actually died on the Titanic. Interesting, another piece of Vegas history there. Um, he wrote a letter absolutely outraged that she would ask for so much money.
Oh.
So some negotiating had to go there, but she won
Yeah.
at the end, and she died in 1926. She's buried at Edenvale Cemetery in the mausoleum there, and you know some of the Ernie Cragen, was very involved in law here very early on. I mean, we're talking about people who came here literally on wagons, in 1905. So, and Cragen and Pike is still around as an insurance company. There was, there are still, at least there was, some attorneys that still had some of the earliest licenses here in Southern Nevada. There's one in particular, I think, is license number 4. So I won't name him on your show after I can name him. I'm sure you know him anyway.
It's easy to look up, right?
Yeah, very easy. So,
but attorney licenses were given until much later.
What was that?
They didn't give attorney numbers until much later.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I do a lot of research because of the nature of the business I do. I not just do curate murals and do tours, but I also help people understand the pedigree of their historic buildings. And so I work a lot with the county assessor's maps, right? And it is my belief the county assessor's map's a mess. There was moments in Vegas history, quite well documented moments in Vegas history, when archives were just destroyed. There was either by fire or on purpose. County files don't seem to exist very long. Don't go back far. The city's archives were destroyed. Most of them were destroyed in a fire in the 1970s. Under very questionable circumstances. I don't know what they were trying to hide, but the
70s, right? I mean, you're talking about, in Vegas.
So
they have a whole museum about that, right?
Yes, they do. Actually, not far from where that fire actually took place. When I do the research, I know there's buildings in Las Vegas that date back to the railroad, 1905, 1906, 1907. But when you look at the county assessor's map, they all start in 1929. Why is that? Well, that's when the county finally hired an assessor. Just happened to be Betty Willis's father. So Betty Willis designed the Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas sign. And her father was the first county assessor. And I believe from what she told me that he was elected in 1922, and that's the reason why she used 1922 on the silver dollars on the welcome sign. Because it would have been appropriate for 1905, but she decided, that's a rumor. I mean, or that's kind of a tale that had been told. But we began seeing assessments all starting in 1929. And so there's nothing really before that, unless you dig a little bit deeper. You have to go into the archives and stuff like that.
Yeah. So attorneys have had kind of a hand in everything from the beginning, negotiating. And now it seems to me, and maybe it's just because I'm so involved in it, right? Like there is, other than kind of the craziness on the strip, outside of the strip, like to me it seems like culturally the attorneys kind of dominate like what's visible.
Well, just from when we have to be careful how we word that, because what we see in a billboard, that's advertising. Okay, but what you see on the ground is a little different, right? And so you can go into the arts district and people aren't drawn up anymore to the giant billboards. And we're hoping, the city will eventually get those billboards taken down, because in the arts district, where all the architecture is very low lying, you have these giant billboards. It's kind of, but that's advertising culture, because the city, the reason why billboards stick out, because the city is pretty low. It's with the exception of the strip and some areas of Fremont Street, the architecture is much taller, and so it kind of obscures the billboards. Now, granted, if you're driving the freeway with billboard after billboard after billboard, now there's the dynamic ones that change and all that, which are kind of cool. And I've been working on some projects to actually, some of the billboards that don't have anything on them or no one's paid for the ad, there's some available space, and I've been working to try to get some artists on there. so that when the billboards, aren't selling, at least
Hmm.
maybe we could put something up there that's visually different, something that talks about Vegas's art scene and stuff like that. And so, and again, and that's another thing, going back to culture and what people care about in our community is, billboards are a perfect example of a community in other places where the community banded together to have them banned. Be forewarned, that could happen in Vegas. I'm not saying I'm pushing for
Hmm.
that, but
Yeah.
it's, because sometimes in neighborhoods like the Arts District, billboards should not exist in a neighborhood. That in the Arts District, it just does not look well. And I know it generates revenue for those property owners, but they're ugly. But along the freeways, they don't bother me. And some of the billboards that some of these attorneys put out are hilarious. There's another guy who will remain nameless on Maryland Parkway.
Hmm.
Um, he just, his billboards are just hilarious. He does these kind of cultural references to the 1970s and 80s and stuff about his past as well, which are fascinating. It's just funny. And then there's a new one that just came up in Chinatown where the attorney's wearing half a suit and then he's flexing his muscles on the other side.
Some of it could be some pretty hilarious kind of
Yeah,
artwork, and kind of go back to that cultural, right? Like where
yeah,
are we at
yeah.
with yeah.
And I think if you want to stand out in the crowd, and especially
Hmm.
in a city like Las Vegas where spectacle is the game here, I mean, the brighter, the most spectacular, you got to think a little bit more outside the box. And if a billboard is your way to advertise, working with a local artist to help you elevate that, or local graphic designer would really elevate the game, I think, because I think billboards can be, they can be architecturally stunning if designed properly. Because a pole with just a square on top or a rectangle on top doesn't work. But you can do things on the pole. You can make it look more visually stunning, because the more visually stunning, the more it's going to grab, the eye is going to gravitate towards that. And so I think there's an opportunity there. Hint,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, thank you.
hint.
Yeah, yeah, no. When I first jumped into personal injury, I worked with a brother and sister firm, and I remember we put up the billboard, and it was just so embarrassing, right? And everybody, right, within my little tight knit community would just make fun of it, right? I mean, it was good, right? I mean, they
Sure.
knew, they remembered, right? That, hey, this guy's an attorney, and so that helped out. But I mean, it's interesting what you get back to the point, right? I mean, this is what we see when we're flying down the freeway and it's just up. And so how do we look down? How do we shift our focus down and say, okay, Vegas does have a culture and it is embedded in art. So how do we then focus on that? Because for maybe it's because of my kids, right? Like we see what's on TV or what's out there just in front of us, and a lot of it is the sports, right? The sports is just something so drawing right now. Or you have so many artists, good artists, right, coming down, musicians coming down to the strip and performing, or all kinds of fancy shows. And so how do we take a step back, quit looking up, and look at what's right in front of us?
Well, you know, I've been involved in the art scene my entire career, in some cultural arts aspect, whether it's sitting on the board of a museum, whether it's sitting on the board of the Arts District Association, again,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm doing currently, donating to Nevada Humanities, whatever is cultural, I'm interested in, because I feel that Vegas is a city that has a great cultural art scene. It had one. It kind of disappeared for a while, and then it came back because people took an interest in it. So it was always this very light hum in the background. The first historical society was started in 1946. The first parade took place on our fifth anniversary in Las Vegas in 1910. We have photos of the first Christmas trees on Fremont Street, where they would literally put the giant Christmas tree in the middle of the street with a bunch of seats around it so the kids can play with Santa Claus and whatever. We have photos of that. We have the Eldorado Parade, and it's what has happened is we've lost the ability to carry over those traditions. Um, we had a big push in the 1970s by local business people to help spearhead a performing arts center at UNLV. So UNLV built the Artemis Ham Concert Hall, named after the famous Ham family that arrived in Vegas in 1905. We have Judy Bailey Theater, And then in 1979, 1980, they built what is, in my belief, is the most important work of sculpture in Las Vegas history, which is the flashlight at the Performing Arts Center at UNLV, which is, it anchors the two performing arts centers. So one is more focused on performance art, such as theater, and the other one is more concerts related to, the symphony, right? So Myron Martin, who is the chairman and CEO, president of the Smith Center, cut his teeth at the Performing Arts Center at UNLV before he went on and spearheaded the project that opened in 2012. So,
I didn't know this, and I didn't know the significance of that flashlight. And I went to law school at UNLV, and I don't know how many times I walked past that going to school and going back to my car.
So the flashlight, it was designed by Kuja van Bruggen and Klaus Oldenburg. They were a couple. Try saying that 3 times fast. And Kuja and Klaus, it were inspired, and I think it was more his wife. I think ultimately it was his wife was the ultimate, because back then the men always get all the attention, but it was she was inspired by the flashlights of going into theaters in New York City back in the 1920s and 30s, when you had ushers holding flashlights down so you knew where you were going. And so originally the flashlight was supposed to point up with a beam of light coming out of the top of it. But she felt that that would be too imperious, because the arts are for everybody. So she flipped it upside down. And so I'm old enough to remember those flashlights. When you put it upside down, it kind of always had this little glow of light around the bottom of it. And the light at the bottom of the flashlight is actually the flashlight upside down, welcoming people. And because it's made out of steel, it also works as an instrument, because what we would do when I was at UNLV, we could go in between the slats, and you can bang on the steel, and it makes a sound. It's pretty interesting. So it works both as not just a sculpture, but also a musical instrument of some kind. But interestingly enough, the silhouette of the sculpture, not just does it work as a sculpture at night, quite lovely, especially the way it's lit up at the bottom, and because it's painted black, it always shows a void. At night, it's the void of the flashlight, right, in the background. During the day, it's also, because it's black, it has that void as well. You see this void in the environment. And it's really interesting how they've done that. No other sculpture in Vegas really captured that really well like the flashlight does. Luis Varela Rico was commissioned by the Arts Commission. When I sat on the Arts Commission back in 2012 to 2018, we commissioned him to do a piece on Main Street, right there at the confluence between Main Street and Commerce, and it's called Radial Symmetry. And it's designed similarly with the slats. His is made out of aluminum instead of steel, and it represents the Paiute baskets of the community as an homage to the original inhabitants of Las Vegas. And some people also, it reminds them of the wheels on a train or the turbines at Hoover Dam, that create the electricity. So again, those two, I would say, were probably the best sculptures we've had in the city in a generation, because they're really just really well done, and they're very site specific. One celebrates the culture of Las Vegas, and the other one celebrates the beauty of the theatrical performances that anchor these two important performing arts centers.
I've always liked art, but I don't know what art is. Like, I have no idea what it is. And like, seriously, like, I walked past that, I don't know how many times, right? It must have been 200 times that I walked past that, and I had no idea what that was.
Yeah, it's what we've done as a city. I think the Nevada Department of Transportation has done an excellent job, and I was very supportive of this very early on, that they came out with a plan statewide to beautify all the freeway entrances. And so they pretty much, almost all of Southern Nevada is done, with the exception of the Spring Mountain Interchange, which is coming. I think they're waiting on the county, and actually the county's waiting on me to come up with some recommendation. So to beautify those interchanges, so that when people are getting off the freeway or onto the freeway, at the stop, which is always the most stressful part of driving anywhere when you're a personal injury attorney, you know this. It gives you the visual, there's a visual calm when you look at something creative like that. So let's say you're one of the best is at the freeway exchange at Charleston and the I-95 or the I-11 now, and it's the bridges are painted. It's got these beautiful sculptures. It's really cool. The one at Star also on the I-15 and Star, which is right before you get to at the M Resort, is beautiful. It's got these beautiful sculptures and everything.
Yeah.
They've done a beautiful job, and I've had friends who have come back to Vegas decades later after they moved out of town after they graduated from high school. And like, when did Vegas get all this cool art? When did this all happen? I said, well, you left. I've been part of it.
Yeah.
You know, and so we're seeing the city reinvesting in itself to make it prettier, because the Strip gets all the attention. The Strip is beautiful. It's quite beautiful, except when NASCAR, or not NASCAR, F1 comes around and they destroy the whole visual.
Board everything up.
They board everything up.
Yeah.
But, you know, the city has a very active arts commission. The city of Henderson has an arts commission. The city of North Las Vegas has an art committee. The city of Boulder City has a very active arts commission. We see art in Laughlin. Mesquite has an art museum. They have an art museum before we do. You know, the culture is changing, and more people are interested in the cultural arts because they realize, one, we've always had it. It's always been the hum in the background, but so many people from outside the city have come in and they have not embraced it very much. And then when they discover it, they're like, oh, Vegas does have a cool scene. And so they discover the Arts District. And now the Arts District is the most dynamic neighborhood in the city that wasn't built by some corporation like MGM or Caesars, you know. And so it's organic. And for many years, MGM was trying to take, when Tony Hsieh moved downtown and tried to do his thing, you know, and I worked for Tony for 4.5 years. A lot of the hotels were trying to recreate, especially Park MGM right in front of the T-Mobile Arena. They had the giant Jenga game and the cornhole game and all the stuff that you already saw in downtown, to try to kind of create a downtown-esque, but very sterilized downtown-esque down in Park MGM area. And so, but now the Arts District is becoming such the it part of the city to be in, that we're, you know, Holstein's closes at the Cosmopolitan and, you know, relocates to the Arts District. That's a game-changing moment. You know, gentrification has taken hold in downtown. And now our key challenge as a community, especially myself who lives in that neighborhood, is how do we ensure that those new businesses that come down, number one, hire local artists, you know, instead of bringing artists from outside. How do we ensure rent stabilization? Because artists don't make a lot of money. You know, they don't have an attorney's salary, right? How do we keep rents affordable? And how do we keep the art in the Arts District? You know, because when new developers come in, I try to reach out to them right as they go into the planning commission meeting to do their little presentation, and I'm there with my business card. I said, your property needs art, and I'm the guy who's going to curate it for you. I've been in when the Sphere opened in 2 years ago. I was interviewed a lot by media in England, in Germany. You know, I do a lot of media interviews, and there was one in particular. It wasn't the BBC, but it was another organization out of London or something like that. And they were interviewing me because they were going to build one in London, a Sphere, and half the size, I think. And I told them, I said, no, that's not going to work. And because they said, what do you think this? And I said, London, you can't put a Sphere in any European city. None. There's not one European city that you could put anything like what you have on the Strip. Now, and they were like, oh, I'm like, it won't work. And now I know why there was such a backlash. You know, you've got 1,000-year-old buildings there. You know, you can't, in a Sphere would just stick out like a sore thumb. All of London's architecture is atrocious, with the exception of the historic buildings, the Shard, all these new buildings. They built them funny to make a statement in a city that doesn't need to make a statement. You've got a king, for crying out loud. You've got the best tourist attraction in the world. You keep them caged up in their golden palace, and people from the United States will go and travel to take pictures with them. Okay, that's all you need. You don't need a sphere. Now, Dubai, it's a different story. Tokyo could get away with it. Hong Kong, most definitely. But that's about it. You can't put a sphere anywhere. But in Vegas, we allow architects to be able to do things like that because we're not going to think twice about it. You want to shut down the strip for 6 months for a car race? Sure, do it. Will it impact the community? Absolutely. Will you get sued? Probably. You know, but Vegas is a petri dish, or it's not a petri, it's a science experiment. It's like we allow people to be creative here. You want to do something crazy, do it. That's why we have an art scene that is pushing the boundaries as well. So
That's it. That's interesting. I mean, almost going full circle, right? Coming back to the culture, like we've been a crossroads in some sense. We're still a crossroads in the fact that our commissioners and the planning commission says, okay, here's a place where you can build. What do you want to build? Right? What is it going to look like? We're not so much concerned about that because with art, like we don't know where art is going. We don't know what beautiful is until we get there.
You're right. Art's definitely subjective. You know, it's you look. Is it subjective or objective? Anyway,
yes, subjective. Yeah.
You look at a work of art. Does it pull on your heart? You're like, oh, that's really nice. I mean, you have this painting here because you enjoy the art. It did something for you, whether it's religious. I mean, it's religious, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the Good Samaritan, right?
Oh,
it just kind of reminds me, hey, you know, why am I doing this? Why am I an attorney?
Right. That's a great adage, a great metaphor. So art can either, some of it's visually stunning, some of it's provocative. You know, there's art for every, some sculpture, some art people don't like and others do, you know. And then people don't realize sometimes that buildings are art as well. You look at the Strip, it's a work of art. But again, architects are artists. People don't realize that architecture is part of the creative arts. And so you have this, you look at the Strip and it's people, when the Strip starts breaking ground on a new project, people get very interested because what's going to be? What's going to look like? Is it going to be spectacular? You're right. And in the early 1990s, when I was in high school, I mean, I got to experience Excalibur under construction and being built. I got to experience the Luxor being built. I worked at the MGM. I helped open the MGM in 1993. Funny enough, my father helped open the original MGM in 1973, 20 years before that. And so, you know, Vegas thrives on building something new, something exciting, because that's what keeps people coming back here. That's why we've done a good job in tearing down a lot of the old hotels and building even more spectacular hotels, where we see, you know, kind of the city kind of turns its, the community doesn't, there's not a huge backlash when something like the Sphere gets built. We just get excited about it because it's something new and shiny. And the Sphere now defines Vegas architecture, because Vegas architecture was always seen as very gauche and very obtuse and very over the top and very, you know, spectacle. So we took the spectacle of the stage, the showgirl, and we made it into a resort, right? The Hard Rock is finally building its guitar. We're gonna have now this guitar shape in the middle of the Strip, which is, I think, one of the biggest they've ever built. So, or will be the biggest they've ever built. But then, where you see the community really coming together, not really coming together, rather neighborhoods, when things are being built within neighborhoods that don't fit within a certain aesthetic. I remember when they legalized marijuana here back in 2017, or became legal in July of 2017. Some people in certain neighborhoods in the city, like Summerlin and Green Valley, not so much in Henderson, were complaining about a dispensary opening up in the neighborhood. But dispensaries, as the law is written, have to look a certain way. They cannot look like a head shop. You know, like you go to Seattle and they're just this head shop in the middle of this kind of sketchy neighborhood. Our dispensaries are beautiful. They're architecturally they look nice. They're well decorated on the inside. A lot of dispensaries have art. I've curated some art on the dispensaries. Um, Early on, I was one of the first people to curate art on a dispensary, and then 12 hours later, it got removed because the county commissioner didn't like it. So, um, but another example of kind of interesting how Vegas responds to architecture is a recent the new Mormon temple being built out at Lone Mountain. And I remember when the original Mormon temple was built out in Hollywood, uh, not Hollywood,
Off of Hollywood.
off of Hollywood, up in the neighborhood. And we got to go in it. So they had opened it up, and we had to wear these little boots on our feet, and they toured.
There's white carpet inside.
Oh, of course, everything
Yeah.
went inside, so
Yeah.
you can't get it all dirty. And people loved it. People were very curious. And some people complained, why did they build it so far away from the city? You know, of course, it's not a tourist attraction. You can't go in it. You have to be LDS to go in it, unless they invite you in. And they did invite the community. It was 3 days. We all went. My mom and I went, and it's very interesting. And it's a beautiful building. Architecture, it's stunning. It has an homage to a lot of other temples. You know, it has the Moroni on the top, and it faces east and all that. And it is stereotypical of 1980s high architecture. So it's done in the V shape. It has an air to the Roman Catholic Cathedral on the Strip called Guardian Angel, which was designed by Paul Revere Williams. It's 1962, which is truly a gem of mid-century modern architecture. And it's a beautiful sacred space, right? And so the new LDS temple is being built out it's off of
Lone Mountain.
Lone Mountain.
Yeah.
It looks a little too much like Salt Lake City. You know, it's ugly. I saw people's reaction to it. I said, I get the reaction to it. Maybe if it was designed a little bit more in character with the neighborhood, maybe not so tall. I don't know. But again, you had these NIMBYs, you know, and I think the issue is more because of the lighting. And I took umbrage with the architecture because I thought, you know, the LDS throughout the 1970s and 80s and 90s really were very progressive with their architecture. One of the best buildings, which sadly they tore down, was the Ogden Temple, which is outside of, you know, Salt Lake. You originally from Salt Lake, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right.
So I lived in Sugar House in '97. So,
Oh yeah. That's right where those are my stopping grounds. Right up there, just a little north of there.
The Dancing Cranes place and the little cafes, and we had a little river running behind our place. I rode my bike all over that city. I loved it, and so I have a deep connection with Salt Lake. I love the town. But I moved there. I only lived there 3 or 4 months. So we this was all before the Olympics. So they were starting to plan things, and they were already going to start tearing down stuff. The house that I lived in was torn down, and they built a Starbucks, of course.
A Starbucks, right?
Yeah, right, a Starbucks.
Yeah.
So, but they kept the creek. The creek was preserved, so you could still go back there. And I was like, well, the house was there, but now it's a parking lot. But you had these. It was these beautiful. I thought some people didn't like the Ogden Temple. I thought it was cool just because it had this round base and this spire. And
going back, it was time. It was something that was from its time, right?
Without a doubt. And I think should have been preserved probably because it was a high level of mid-century modern architecture. Really, it's a very sophisticated building, and it reminded me a lot of what what's his name? I forgot the architect who designed. Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. If you ever get a chance to go, it is a mid-century modern paradise. It's the buildings are just stunning, very minimalist but gorgeous, you know. And that temple reminded me of that, and the Vegas temple right now reminds me of that as well. The new one, I think they went a little too
economical. Maybe it's more, you know. I'm LDS, right? And the building that we call our stake center, it was built by people in Henderson, right? And there's always been, it's old, right? It's got issues with everything, right?
Oh, of course.
Like old buildings do, especially here in Las Vegas. And there's always the people who actually built it, the guys that were up there putting the plaster on it. They've been the ones that have been stalwart saying, we're not tearing this down, right? And it's different. It's different than the general chapels that we have that are just, you know, just the A-frame. um, and having that uniqueness, right? It's, and the LDS Church got away from that, I think, for more economical purposes, right? Having a set architectural plan versus, building something that's unique to the culture where the building's going to be.
Right. And I think when the community came out in opposition, I think a lot of them because of custom homes and stuff like that in that neighborhood. Uh, I made a few phone calls, and I just thought they wanted to quote me in the newspaper. I said, I'm not interested because I don't want it's. I would have talked about the architecture. Maybe they could have worked a little bit more with the neighborhood to try to get something a little bit more in character with the neighborhood. Whereas the Hollywood Temple, it's so funny up there because you have this very unique building, but all of the houses in the neighborhood, some of them are so out of place for Southern Nevada.
Mhm.
You have a gingerbread, Victorian up there that people, I mean, and it's cool to live up there. I mean, to visit. I have friends that live up there, but um, you have houses that are just so out of character for the city because it's just like we never had that kind of style of architecture. Which Victorian architecture just does not exist in Vegas. We were not a Victorian city. We were an Edwardian city. Um, so yeah, it was interesting. But again, I don't know. I think the community comes out against certain things or the height of certain buildings when it's within their within their sphere of attention. Which, for instance, when Red Rock Station was built, the casino, people complained it was too tall, and then there was complaints about the visual impact on Red Rock Canyon itself. Sure, if you live within the vicinity, you're going to see that tower, and the tower was designed to blend. But I can see it from my apartment on the fourth floor, and it's that big. It has
Right.
no visual
Yeah.
impact whatsoever on the scenery of my view of Red Rock Canyon at all. Now, when they built Newport Tower directly across the street from my house, all of a sudden now I didn't have Mount Charleston in front of me. Now, did I go and complain that it was, no. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I, the only, when Bob Coffin was still a city councilman, the new ICE building, which right now has been in the news a lot, there's been some protests there last night, which is 2 blocks from my house. The ICE building, I, uh, when they built the parking garage, they didn't they didn't cover the parking garage. And so out of my bedroom window, I see their lights on all night. And so I told Bob, I said, Bob, you approved this. Why didn't you have them cover the parking garage? At least put a screen over it that plants can grow on it or something more in character with it. Well, Paco, this is a great investment in Las Vegas. And I'm like, Bob, but I don't care about the investment, how much they donated to your campaign. I care about, which was federal building and probably nothing, but I care about my neighborhood and about how that impacts the little houses that were across the street from that building that were built in the 1930s and 40s. And now you have a parking garage where all night, all you see is that wash of ugly fluorescent light coming out. I mean, and that's when the community can come together and request change, right? And I hate parking garages. They're the one thing I can't stand. Parking garages are the bane of my existence. If I see one more ugly parking garage, I'm going to go to the Pat Tillman Bridge and jump. I hate them. They're ugly. You go to other cities, they cover them up. You don't see that it's a parking garage. But because people go cheap, parking garages are expensive. You have to hold a lot of weight, but make them look nice. And that's where I come in. I'm like, you need a mural on the side of your building. So,
and commission some artists in town
you
to
need to come downtown. I mean, you've got your connection in the art with Chad. I mean,
I know it would be fun. I'll tell you what, man. If I had, it is crazy. And
it is kid friendly. How old are your kids?
Yeah, so from 4 to 18. My daughter loves art. My daughter, she's, I don't know what it is that she likes about art, but she's probably the one. And
encourage
yeah,
it. She might be an architect one day. Or
I know. I'm really pushing her to be a lawyer.
Of course,
because I know
you sound like my Jewish mother.
It's just so practical. That's the problem. Is like she could work for me and work 5 to 10 hours a week, and she's gonna make more money than her husband.
Yeah.
And so it's like she can stay home and support her husband and whatever he wants to do, and they won't have to worry about money. I mean, that's the hope.
Right.
Right.